The morning started like any other in the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime. Ambassador Jake Martinez sat in his usual seat, reviewing trade agreements while alien delegates from across the galaxy discussed mining rights on the Outer Rim worlds. The Zephyrians wanted better deals for their crystal exports, and the crystalline representatives argued about shipping routes through their territory. Everything seemed normal until Jake felt his personal communicator vibrate against his wrist. He glanced down at the small device and saw a message that made his blood run cold. The text was simple and direct, with no fancy words or explanations. It said Operation Homeward begins in 6 hours and all human personnel are to evacuate immediately. With no explanations and no goodbyes. Jake read the message 3 times to make sure he understood it correctly. His hands started to shake as the reality of what was happening hit him. The message had come through the deepest security channels that only the highest-ranking humans in the galaxy knew about. Jake had been told about these channels during his briefing 20 years ago, when he first became an ambassador, but he never thought they would actually be used. The fact that this message was real meant that something very big and very serious was happening. Jake looked around the council chamber at all the alien faces he had worked with for so many years. The Antarian trade minister was arguing with a Nixarian diplomat about fuel prices, while the hegemony representative took notes on her datapad. None of them had any idea what was about to happen. Jake felt a strange mix of sadness and relief as he realized he would never have to sit through another one of these endless meetings. On the other side of the galaxy, Dr. Lisa Park was working late in her laboratory on Kepler Station. She had been studying the genetic patterns of a rare space fungus that could be used to make new medicines when her communicator buzzed. Lisa read the same message that Jake had received and immediately understood what she had to do. She had been preparing for this day for 15 years. Lisa moved quickly through her lab, collecting her most important research files and loading them onto encrypted storage devices. She deleted all the shared databases that contained her work, and made sure that no traces of her research would be left behind for other species to use. The space fungus project would die with her departure, but that was the price of keeping human knowledge safe. Captain Ben Carter was commanding his destroyer in the Joint Defense Fleet when the message reached him. His ship, the UES Montana, was part of a patrol group protecting trade routes from raiders and pirates. Ben read the evacuation order and felt his heart start beating faster. He had been waiting for this message for 12 years, ever since he first learned about the secret evacuation plans during his promotion to captain. Ben called his bridge crew together and told them they had received urgent orders from Earth Command. He explained that they needed to break formation immediately and head for the nearest jump point. His crew was confused because they had not received any official communications from Fleet Command, but they trusted their captain and followed his orders without question. The human crew of the Montana worked quickly to prepare for departure, while Ben sent false reports to the Joint Fleet Command saying his ship had developed engine problems and needed to return to port for repairs. The lie would only buy them a few hours, but that was all they needed to get away from the other ships in the patrol group, all across the galaxy. Similar scenes were playing out as humans received the evacuation message and began to leave their posts. Engineer Amy Foster was working on a fusion reactor design for the Vorthan colonies when she got the message. She immediately shut down all her computer systems and started packing her personal belongings. Amy had spent 5 years designing these reactors, and she knew the Vorthans would not be able to maintain them without human help. Amy deleted all the technical specifications and maintenance protocols from the colony databases before she left. She also disabled the automatic diagnostic systems that kept the reactors running smoothly. The Vorthans would have working power for maybe 2 weeks before things started to break down, and they would have no idea how to fix them. Dr. Kevin Hall was researching new medicines on the medical station orbiting Antares when he received the message. Kevin had been working with alien doctors to develop cures for diseases that affected multiple species. His research was considered vital to galactic health and safety, but Kevin knew he had to abandon it all. Kevin spent his last few hours destroying research samples and wiping computer files that contained years of medical breakthroughs he made. sure that no other species would be able to continue his work without starting completely from scratch. Kevin felt guilty about condemning millions of aliens to suffer from diseases he could have cured, but his loyalty was to humanity first. Meanwhile, back in the council chambers, Jake Martinez was trying to act normal while his mind raced with everything he needed to do. He had 6 hours to close down all human diplomatic operations and prepare for humanity's complete withdrawal from galactic politics. Jake started sending coded messages to human diplomats on other worlds telling them to begin emergency protocols. The Galactic Council session continued with debates about trade regulations and territorial disputes. The alien delegates had no idea that the human representative sitting among them was planning to destroy their entire way of life. Jake listened to their arguments about shipping costs and mining rights, knowing that in a few hours none of it would matter anymore. When the session broke for lunch, Jake excused himself and went to his private office. He began the process of transferring all human assets out of galactic banks and closing diplomatic accounts that had been open for decades. Jake also sent destruction orders to human facilities across council space, telling them to wipe all databases and disable all equipment before evacuating. As the 6-hour deadline approached, Jake gathered his personal belongings and prepared to make his final appearance before the Galactic Council. He had practiced this moment in his mind hundreds of times, but he still felt nervous about what he was going to say. Jake knew that his words would mark the end of an era and the beginning of something completely new. The time had come for humanity to leave the galaxy behind, and the aliens would soon discover just how much they had depended on the humans they had always taken for granted. 3 days had passed since Ambassador Jake Martinez walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, and the alien representatives were still trying to understand what had happened. Chairman Vexstar called emergency meetings every few hours, but nobody had any answers about why the humans had suddenly disappeared. The Zephyrian Trade Minister kept asking when the human merchants would return to finish their business deals, while the Crystalline Research Director wondered why all the joint science projects had stopped working. The first real sign of trouble came when the quantum communication network went offline across half the galaxy. Zareth of the Hegemony was trying to contact her homeworld when she discovered that the entire system had shut down completely. The network had connected thousands of worlds and space stations, allowing instant communication across vast distances, but now it was nothing more than dead metal and dark screens. Zareth called the network maintenance department and demanded to know what was wrong. The Antarian technician who answered her call sounded confused and worried as he explained that all the human engineers had disappeared 3 days ago. The technician said he had tried to restart the system, but the computers were asking for access codes that only the humans knew. Without those codes, the entire network would stay offline forever. Dr. Kexalon, the Antarian science minister, was having his own problems on the research station orbiting Vega Prime. He had been reviewing the weekly progress reports when he noticed that most of the ongoing projects had stopped completely. The reports showed that human researchers had been involved in more than half of all the scientific work being done across council space. Kex single quotes Lon pulled up the detailed files and saw that critical research into new medicines had ground to a halt because the human doctors had taken all their data with them. The terraforming projects that could turn dead worlds into garden planets had stopped because the human engineers had deleted all the technical specifications. Even basic research into faster-than-light travel had become impossible because the humans had been the ones who understood the complex mathematics involved. The economic situation was getting worse by the hour. Merchant Lord Kelvar was watching his trading empire collapse as human-designed systems failed one after another. The automated cargo handling systems in spaceports across the galaxy had stopped working because they could not contact their human maintenance crews. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades were now dangerous and unpredictable because the human navigators had taken their star charts with them. Kelvar tried to hire non-human crews to replace the missing humans, but he quickly discovered that nobody else understood how the trading systems worked. The humans had designed everything from the cargo containers to the shipping schedules, and they had not shared their knowledge with anyone else. Kelvar realized that his business would be completely destroyed within a few weeks if the humans did not come back. On the mining world of Kepler-7, the situation was becoming desperate. The atmospheric processors that kept the air breathable had started showing warning signs, and the Vorthan colonists did not know how to fix them. Engineer Tony Garcia had maintained these systems for 8 years before he disappeared with all the other humans. The processors were incredibly complex machines that required constant adjustments and repairs to keep working properly. Colony Administrator Morgeth sent urgent messages to the council asking for help, but nobody knew what to do. The Vorthans had tried to study the human technical manuals, but the documents were written in scientific language that was too advanced for them to understand. Morgeth realized that his entire colony might have to be evacuated if they could not figure out how to keep the processors running. The military situation was just as bad. Admiral Vexmore of the Joint Defense Fleet was looking at reports that showed huge gaps in their coverage of council space. The human ships had formed the backbone of the rapid response network that protected outer rim worlds from raiders and pirates. Without those ships, the fleet could only cover about 30% of the territory they were supposed to defend. Vexmore tried to redeploy his remaining ships to fill the gaps, but it was impossible. The human vessels had been faster and more advanced than anything the other species could build. They had also been equipped with special sensors and weapons that could detect and stop threats that other ships could not handle. The Admiral realized that the defense of Council space had become almost impossible without human help. Intelligence reports were coming in from across the galaxy, and they all told the same story. Every human facility had been abandoned but left in perfect condition. The humans had not destroyed anything or stolen any alien property. They had simply taken their own people and equipment and vanished without explanation. It was the most organized and complete evacuation in galactic history. Curtin, the head of Galactic Intelligence, was studying these reports in his office when he made a disturbing discovery. The humans had been planning this evacuation for years, possibly decades. They had quietly built their own ships and developed their own technology, while pretending to be loyal members of the Council. They had also been collecting detailed information about every other species in the galaxy. Curtin found evidence that humans had placed observers in every major government and had been monitoring military communications and political activities. The quiet, helpful humans had been running the most sophisticated spy network anyone had ever seen. They knew everything about Council military strength, economic weaknesses, and political divisions, but they had never used this information to hurt anyone. The medical crisis was perhaps the most serious problem of all. Dr. Yelenara the Crystalline Health Minister reported that 17 different diseases were starting to spread again across Council space. Human medical researchers had developed treatments for these conditions over the past 50 years, but without ongoing human support, the medicines were becoming less effective. Yelenara tried to contact human medical facilities but discovered that they had all been completely evacuated. The humans had taken their research with them and had deleted all the shared medical databases. Millions of people across the galaxy would start dying from diseases that had been cured decades ago. Chairman Vextar finally called a full emergency session of the Galactic Council. As he looked around the chamber at the worried faces of representatives from dozens of species, he realized that they were facing the greatest crisis in galactic history. The humans had not attacked them or threatened them, but their departure was destroying everything the Council had built over the past century. 2 weeks had passed since the humans disappeared, and the crisis was getting worse every day. On the mining colony of Vorthan Prime, the atmospheric processors were failing faster than anyone had expected. Colony Administrator Morgeth watched the air quality readings drop hour by hour, knowing that his people would start dying soon. If they could not fix the machines that kept their world breathable, the processors were massive, complex systems that covered an area the size of a small city. They pulled poisonous gases from the atmosphere and replaced them with oxygen that the Vorthan colonists could breathe. Engineer Amy Foster had designed and maintained these systems for 5 years before she vanished with all the other humans. Amy had made the processors look easy to operate, but without her knowledge, they were becoming deadly traps. Morgith had brought in engineers from 3 different species to study the processors, but none of them understood how the machines worked. The technical manuals were written in human scientific language that was too advanced for other species to follow. The diagnostic computers kept displaying error messages that nobody could translate. The Vorthans were running out of time and running out of options. The first processor failed on day 16, sending toxic fumes into the main colony dome. Morgith ordered an immediate evacuation of the residential sectors while his teams tried desperately to restart the machine. They managed to get it working again, but only for a few hours before it shut down permanently. 2 more processors failed the next day, and Morgith realized that his entire colony would have to be abandoned within a week. Admiral Exmoor was dealing with his own nightmare as reports of raids and attacks flooded in from across the outer rim territories. The Syndicate pirates had noticed that the human ships were gone, and they were taking advantage of the gaps in galactic defense. Merchant vessels were being attacked and destroyed while colony worlds sent desperate calls for help that nobody could answer. The Joint Defense Fleet was trying to cover 5 times more territory with half the ships they used to have. Vixmore had been forced to abandon entire sectors, leaving millions of people defenseless against pirate attacks. The human ships had been faster and better armed than anything else in the fleet, and without them, the remaining vessels were spread too thin to be effective. On the trading station of Nexus 7, Merchant Lord Kelvar was watching his business empire collapse in real time. The automated trading systems that handled cargo transfers and payment processing had started making critical errors. Ships were being loaded with the wrong goods and payments were being sent to the wrong accounts. The delicate balance of galactic commerce was breaking down because the humans who had designed and maintained the systems were gone. Kelvar tried to switch to manual operations, but discovered that none of his alien employees understood how the trading protocols worked. The humans had created a complex network of systems that made interstellar commerce possible, but they had not shared the technical details with anyone else. Without human oversight, the entire galactic economy was heading for complete collapse. The medical crisis was becoming a disaster of epic proportions. Dr. Yelinara received reports every day of new disease outbreaks across Council space. The treatments that human doctors had developed were becoming useless as the diseases evolved and adapted. Without human medical researchers to update the medicines, millions of people were starting to die from conditions that had been easily curable just weeks before. On the research station orbiting Antares, a plague that attacked the nervous systems of 3 different species had broken out among the staff. Dr. Kevin Hall had been working on a cure for this disease before he disappeared, but his research had been deleted from all the computers. Yelinara sent her best doctors to the station, but they could not understand Kevin's notes well enough to continue his work. The plague spread to other stations and colonies as infected people traveled before they knew they were sick. Within days, thousands of people were showing symptoms, and the number was growing exponentially. Yelinara realized that without human help, this single disease could kill millions of people across the galaxy. Chairman Vexstar called another emergency session of the Galactic Council, but the meeting was smaller than usual. Several species could not send representatives because their communication systems had failed or their ships could not navigate safely without human star charts. The delegates who did attend looked worried and desperate as they listened to reports of crisis after crisis. The crystalline representative reported that their homeworld was experiencing massive power failures because the fusion reactors designed by human engineers were shutting down. The Antarian delegate explained that food production on their agricultural worlds had dropped by 60% because the farming equipment required human maintenance. The Zephyrian trade minister announced that her people were facing starvation because the supply ships could not navigate the complex trade routes without human pilots. Intelligence Chief Curtin presented his latest findings about the human evacuation, and the news was even more disturbing than before. Hidden human facilities had been discovered on dozens of worlds, and these installations contained technology that was decades ahead of anything the Council had ever seen. The humans had been developing advanced weapons, defensive systems, and spacecraft. While pretending to be peaceful members of the galactic community, Curtin explained that the humans had been preparing for this evacuation for at least 50 years, possibly longer. They had quietly built their own industrial base and developed their own scientific research programs while working alongside other species on joint projects. The level of planning and organization required for such a massive deception was beyond anything the Council had thought possible. The most shocking discovery came from the abandoned human embassy on Nexus Prime. Hidden beneath the diplomatic offices was a massive computer center that contained detailed files on every species in the Council. The humans had collected information about military capabilities, economic weaknesses, political structures, and even biological vulnerabilities. They could have used this knowledge to destroy any species in the galaxy, but instead, they had just packed up and left. Vexstar stared at the intelligence reports, trying to understand how his government had been so completely fooled. The humans had seemed like helpful junior partners who were grateful to be included in galactic civilization. Nobody had suspected that they were actually running the most sophisticated intelligence operation in history while secretly preparing to abandon everyone they had worked with. As the session continued, more bad news arrived from across the galaxy. The humans had not just left, they had taken the foundation of modern civilization with them, and everything was falling apart without their knowledge and expertise. 1 month after the humans vanished, Dr. Mergath was leading an archaeological team through the ruins of what had been the human research facility on Kepler Station. The building looked normal from the outside, but when they went deeper underground, they found massive chambers filled with equipment that nobody had ever seen before. The technology was clearly human, but it was far more advanced than anything the humans had ever shared with the Council. Mergath and his team spent days exploring the underground complex, trying to understand what they were looking at. There were laboratories with experimental devices that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Manufacturing facilities contained half-built machines that appeared to be starship engines, but were designed using principles that no other species understood. Storage rooms were filled with materials that did not appear on any known periodic table. The most disturbing discovery was a room filled with medical equipment that could apparently cure any disease known to galactic science. Lisa Park had worked in the public laboratories above ground studying simple space fungi, but down here, she had been developing treatments for conditions that killed millions of people every year. The humans had possessed the ability to save countless lives, but they had kept it secret from everyone else. Similar discoveries were being made on worlds across the galaxy. On Vorthan, Prime archaeologists found a hidden human facility that contained the complete technical specifications for atmospheric processors that were 10 times more efficient than the ones currently in use. The humans had been able to terraform dead worlds in a fraction of the time it took other species, but they had never shared this knowledge with anyone. Intelligence Chief Curtin was coordinating the investigation of these facilities from his office on Nexus Prime. Every day brought new reports of hidden human installations that contained technology decades ahead of current galactic science. The humans had been conducting parallel research programs that far exceeded anything they had worked on with other species. Curtin realized that the humans had been playing a long game that spanned multiple generations. They had pretended to be helpful junior partners while secretly developing the technology they would need to become completely independent. The level of planning and deception involved was staggering, and it raised uncomfortable questions about how well the Council really knew any of its member species. The archaeological teams also found evidence that the humans had been monitoring galactic civilization much more closely than anyone had suspected. Computer systems in the hidden facilities contained detailed records of every major political decision made by the Council over the past 50 years. The humans had been tracking military movements, economic trends, and even private conversations between government officials. Captain Ben Carter had commanded human ships in the Joint Defense Fleet for 12 years, but the investigation revealed that he had been sending regular reports to hidden human commanders during that entire time. The humans had known about every military operation, every strategic plan, and every weakness in galactic defenses. They could have used this information to launch devastating attacks, but instead they had used it to plan their escape. Dr. Kexelon was studying the abandoned research facilities on Antares when he made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the computer systems was evidence that the humans had been preparing for their departure for more than 50 years. Manufacturing records showed that they had been building advanced spacecraft and weapons systems while publicly working on peaceful research projects. The scale of the human deception was becoming clear as more evidence was uncovered. They had created a complete parallel civilization while pretending to be grateful members of the galactic community. Every human in Council Space had been part of this massive conspiracy, and none of them had ever revealed the truth to their alien colleagues and friends. Merchant Lord Kelvar discovered that human trading companies had been secretly transferring resources and equipment to hidden stockpiles for decades. The humans had been preparing for economic independence while publicly participating in galactic commerce. They had accumulated enough supplies to support their entire population for years without any help from other species. The investigation also revealed that humans had placed observers in every major government and organization across the galaxy. These observers had been collecting intelligence while pretending to be ordinary workers, scientists, and diplomats. The human spy network was so sophisticated that it had operated for decades without being detected by any of the galactic intelligence services. Admiral Lexmore learned that human officers in the Joint Fleet had been secretly mapping every military installation and defensive position in Council space. They had detailed knowledge of weapons capabilities, ship designs, and strategic plans that they should never have been able to access. The humans could have destroyed the galactic military at any time, but they had chosen to simply walk away instead. The most shocking discovery came when archaeologists found human facilities that had been operating in empty space far from any inhabited worlds. These installations had been mining asteroids and building massive spacecraft using technology that was generations ahead of anything else in the galaxy. The humans had been preparing their own space-based civilization while everyone thought they were dependent on galactic society. Chairman Vextar reviewed all the evidence in his private office and tried to understand how his government had been so completely fooled. The humans had seemed eager to learn from older species and grateful for the opportunity to join galactic civilization. Nobody had suspected that they were actually conducting the most sophisticated intelligence operation in history while secretly preparing to abandon everyone they worked with. The investigation revealed that every major human achievement in Council space had been deliberately limited to hide their true capabilities. Human scientists had published research that was impressive but not threatening, while keeping their most advanced work completely secret. Human engineers had built systems that were reliable but not too sophisticated while developing far superior technology in hidden facilities. Qo are single quotes. Dunn presented his final report to the Council, and the conclusions were devastating. The humans had never really been members of galactic civilization at all. They had been visitors who studied everything they could learn while preparing to leave at the first sign of trouble. The question that haunted everyone was what had finally convinced them that it was time to go. As the evidence mounted, it became clear that humanity's departure was not a sudden decision, but the culmination of a plan that had been in development for decades. The aliens who had thought they knew the humans realized that they had never really understood them at all. 6 weeks after the humans vanished, a single ship appeared at the edge of Council space near the dead system of Kepler 9. The vessel was clearly of human design, but it was unlike any ship that had ever been seen in galactic space. It was sleek and powerful with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything the Council possessed. The ship broadcast a simple message on all frequencies asking Chairman Vextar to come alone to the coordinates provided. With no weapons and no recording devices, Vextar knew this might be his only chance to get answers about why the humans had abandoned galactic civilization. He took his personal shuttle and traveled to the meeting point despite the protests of his security advisors. The journey took him to an empty region of space where nothing but asteroids and cosmic dust drifted in the darkness. When he arrived, he found the human ship waiting for him like a ghost from the past. Captain Dan Stone had commanded human vessels in the Joint Defense Fleet for 15 years before he disappeared with all the others. Vexstar remembered Don as a quiet professional who always followed orders and never caused trouble. Now Don welcomed the council chairman aboard his ship with cold politeness that made it clear their old friendship was over forever. The interior of the human ship was a revelation in itself. The technology was far more advanced than anything Vexstar had ever seen, with computers and displays that seemed to respond to thought rather than touch. The artificial gravity was perfectly smooth and the air recycling systems were so efficient that the atmosphere felt like breathing on a garden world. This single ship represented technological achievements that the entire council could not match. Don led Vexstar to a conference room where holographic displays showed images from across the galaxy. Vexstar could see the failing atmospheric processors on Vorthan Prime, the collapsing trade networks around Nexus 7, and the plague outbreaks that were spreading across dozens of worlds. The humans were still watching everything that happened in Council space, even though they had abandoned it completely. Vexstar asked the question that had been haunting him for weeks about why the humans had left without any warning or explanation. Don smiled sadly and activated another holographic display that showed files and documents that should have been completely secret. These were Council intelligence reports and government communications that humans should never have been able to access. The files revealed the truth that Vexstar had hoped never to face. From the moment humans had joined the galactic community 50 years ago, they had been classified as a containment species by Council intelligence. Every human scientific breakthrough had been carefully monitored and suppressed if it seemed too dangerous. Human colonies had been secretly prevented from expanding beyond certain limits to keep their population under control. Don showed Vexstar decades of secret communications between council leaders discussing what to do about the human problem. The files contained plans to sterilize human colonies with engineered plagues if their technology became too advanced. There were proposals to assassinate human scientists who made breakthroughs that could threaten galactic stability. Most disturbing of all was the long-term plan to gradually reduce the human population until they were confined to Earth and monitored like animals in a zoo. Vexstar stared at the evidence with growing horror as he realized what his government had been planning. The humans had been treated as useful pets who could solve problems and do work that benefited everyone else, but they were never allowed to reach their full potential. Every time humans made progress that might make them truly independent, the Council had found ways to hold them back or steal their achievements. Don explained that humans had discovered these plans 20 years ago when one of their intelligence operatives managed to access the deepest levels of Council security systems. Every human in galactic space had been told about the conspiracy, and they had been working together ever since to prepare for their departure. The evacuation that seemed so sudden to the aliens had actually been planned and rehearsed for 2 decades. The most damning revelation was that the Council had been feeding humans false information about galactic history and technology to keep them dependent and grateful. The humans had been told they were joining an ancient and wise civilization that would teach them to reach their potential. In reality, they were being systematically deceived and exploited while being prepared for eventual elimination when their usefulness ended. Don showed Vexstar recordings of secret council meetings where leaders discussed humans like they were discussing livestock or laboratory animals. The casual way that alien officials talked about controlling and eventually destroying an entire species was more disturbing than any military threat. The humans had realized that they would never be accepted as equals no matter what they contributed to galactic civilization. Vexstar tried to defend his government by saying that some of those plans were just theoretical contingencies that would never have been implemented. Don interrupted him with a laugh that held no humor at all. He explained that the humans had been monitoring council activities closely enough to know which plans were serious and which were just political theater. The threat to humanity had been very real and very immediate. The human gestured toward the viewports where distant explosions were lighting up the asteroid field around them. Don explained that those were automated mining stations that humans had been operating in secret for decades. The installations had been harvesting resources from dead systems and building the infrastructure needed for humanity. New home far from Council Space. Don told Vexstar that humans were not angry about what had been done to them, but they were deeply disappointed. They had hoped to find friends and allies among the stars, but instead they had found masters who wanted to keep them as clever slaves. The decision to leave had not been made in anger, but in sadness, as humans realized. They would never be welcome as equals in galactic society. The human captain explained that humanity had built something new and better in the depths of space using technology and knowledge that far exceeded anything the Council possessed. They had created their own civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect rather than fear and control. The galaxy that the Council had built would never be invited to join this new human society. As Vexstar prepared to return to Council space, he carried with him the knowledge that his government had made the greatest mistake in galactic history. They had feared what humans might become and tried to prevent them from reaching their potential. In doing so, they had driven away the one species that could have helped them build something truly magnificent among the stars.